Welcome to Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Jeff Stone, he's a supervisor in Riverside County, also a candidate for the California State Senate. That primary election will be held in June 2014. And the district is essentially what? The state Senate district?
Well, it's 100% Riverside County, Brad.
Wow.
It goes all the way from Blythe, all the way around southwestern Riverside County up the 15 freeway, taking in unincorporated Corona and Riverside. So it's the full width of Riverside County, which is pretty big.
And if you think about Riverside County is about 2 million residents, and a state Senate district is about 1 million, give or take.
Yes.
And so it's basically half the county.
It's huge.
How do you campaign when you're trying to reach almost 1 million voters?
Well, obviously we got to take advantage of the new technology with Facebook and Twitter, but I like the old historical way of doing it, and that's by walking. I'll probably hit about 25,000 homes between now and June.
Not bad. Now, I want to speak with you about an issue that impacts not only the state, but counties for sure. And that's the question of our prisons.
Yes.
As you know, the Supreme Court a few years back ruled that California prisons were meting out justice that was cruel and unusual because they were overcrowded. We are now under federal court order to decrease our prison population. The governor has gotten a bit of a reprieve from an order over the summer which says you must now release up to 10,000. So we have until end of February to try to figure out a solution. What's your sense of how the crisis is impacting both the state and counties?
Well, the state has 33 state penitentiaries.
Right.
And they were overcrowded. They were sued, as you mentioned.
Right.
And it also created quite a budget debacle for the governor. He was looking to reduce costs. So what he did was he came up with this AB 109 that he signed into law, which basically pushed a lot of these prisoners down into a local jail.
Right. It's the low-level offenders, the three nons.
Well, the three nons, but that's based on what their last conviction was. So they may have a violent past that is now translating itself into more violent crime that we see into our communities.
And what's interesting too is that if you look at the types of crimes that are qualified as three nons, it could be that it doesn't fall into a classification that would send them to the state prison, but because of the added enhancements, they could wind up serving time in a county jail that's beyond 3 years.
Correct.
And I'm about to speak with Paul Zellerbach, who's your district attorney, and in this county, Riverside, we are seeing people serving time way beyond 3 years, which was the anticipation.
Well, the poster child was right after AB 109 was passed, we actually had a Superior Court judge convicted a convict to 16 years in our local jail. So what are the ramifications have been? It's been that we've congested our jails, not only in Riverside County, but jails throughout the county. We're at capacity. So now instead of the federal government putting the state on order, they're coming to the local government saying, for every convict that goes into your congested jails now, you have to kick somebody out.
And what's interesting is Riverside County specifically is under its own court order, court consent decree from I think almost 20 years ago. Yes. And so you cannot bypass a certain ceiling because of your consent decree. Here's the challenge though, Supervisor. Democrats, Republicans, the governor, everyone's frustrated about it.
Yes.
But there's this federal court order looming, hanging.
Right.
And so what to be done?
Well, I think there's very simple solutions. We have had a state that has been growing, one of the fastest growing states. Riverside County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country. Still is, actually.
I know, even despite the downturn.
And the state has not invested in building new prisons with the growth of our population.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Because
so here we got a $100 billion train to nowhere. We should be taking the $100 billion money and we should be building new state penitentiaries and start keeping our prisoners in the state penitentiary for the serious crimes.
So let's talk about that because a few years ago there was money set aside under the Schwarzenegger administration for prison construction. When Governor Brown took office, the recession was still in full swing and he chose not to appropriate that money for prison construction. We're now in better times.
Yes.
And so the question becomes, is it time for the state to start building prisons? We know Riverside County, for example, I think in Indio and Blythe, they're doing their own jail construction.
Correct.
But is it time to start building prisons?
No question about it. And I think that we have what's called the State Board of Corrections in the
Yes.
state of California that puts these high standards on the living conditions of prisoners. Now, I'm one that believes that when you go to jail or you go to prison, it should be a place of punishment. It should be a place that you never want to go back to.
Right.
And I've been working with Sheriff Joe Arpaio.
Really?
In Phoenix.
He's fairly controversial.
He's very controversial, but he has built these tent prisons that when people go there, and I visited them, they don't want to go back.
Right.
And I asked Sheriff Joe, I said, how do you get away with it in Arizona and we can't get away with it in California? And he says, the reason why is you have a State Board of Corrections there that strips the sheriff of his authority to do what he wants with his prison population or his jail population. If we got rid of the State Board of Corrections here, then our sheriff could spend money and spend half as much as we spend. We spend $52,000 a year housing these guys.
Here's the
we could send them to
challenge.
prison, to college for that amount of money.
A couple challenges. We know in LA County, they are under a civil rights investigation for alleged prison abuse, abuse of prisoners, and so it gets a little dicey. But let's move aside for a second. I want to go back to prison construction, because I do think that there is some level of a consensus that we haven't built prisons in a while. Maybe it's time to start construction. Okay, so let's say we start construction today.
Yes.
It takes a while to build them.
It takes a long time.
And so what do we do right now?
The governor has some extraordinary powers. He can actually, and we saw this happen during the Northridge earthquake, when the governor said we're exempting them from any environmental regulations. We're going to build these freeways because it's a matter of our economic success in Southern California. The governor can waive environmental work, which will delay things 2 or 3 years, and get these prisons built. And I've been in Lubbock, Texas, and seen the way they build prisons. They tilt the walls up, they pour the jail cells in a mold, and they stack them by a crane, and they get these prisons built in 16 months. And we are waiting 3 or 4 years to get these things, or 5 years to get these things done.
Do you feel there could be a consensus built around such extraordinary power? I mean,
yes, I do. I think when we have the public safety crisis that exists today, violent crime is up in all of our cities.
how do we? Here's the question. I was speaking recently with Assemblyman Brian Mainshine from San Diego. I think it's fair to say a fairly moderate Republican, and he has said on the record to me that this is the most significant crisis we're facing in the state today. Yet, if you talk to the general public, I don't know that they really realize how severe our prison crisis is. When you have an earthquake, clear.
Right.
So,
Right.
in some ways, do we need a horrible event to occur in order to be able to get the governor to have the kind of public behind him to engage in extraordinary powers?
Well, unfortunately, in the state of California and even in the federal government, it's always knee-jerk reactions to a terrible crisis that happens. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when one of these dangerous criminals that gets released is going to cause some significant mayhem, and people are going to ask, what the heck happened here?
Right.
So we as elected officials have to do our best to educate the public that the system is broken, it needs to be fixed, we need to build more jails, more prisons.
Prisons being
and,
the key, right.
And uncongest the local jails. We're going to release 12,000 people in Riverside County this year early, prior to the completion of their sentences. But one other thing I'm very proud of I did in Riverside County, we passed the recourse program, require every convict reimburse county expenses.
I know about that
program. So
program.
when you leave our county jail,
about that program.
you're getting a bill for
Right,
your hotel
so you're
stay.
charging $142.42 a day.
Plus the booking fee of $475,
So-
plus medical care.
Well, but here's the issue. Okay, so you charge the prisoners this amount of money. They leave prison and they have this debt.
Yes.
I mean, on the one hand, I get it. On the other hand, don't you want to give them the biggest and best opportunity to succeed? And if they have this debt looming over them, it makes it even harder for them to succeed.
Most of the people that have long-term sentences in our jails are usually indigent people that don't have any assets, don't have any income,
Right.
and they need some vocational skills to make them become productive members of society. Are we going to get the money from them? No. But the people that get arrested for DUIs, petty theft, people that are employed, those are the ones that we're going to hopefully have this as a deterrent to doing crime, where we have this now slogan where if you do the crime, you're going to do the time and you're going to pay the dime in Riverside County. So maybe we're pushing them off to other counties, which is not what we would like to do, but we want to reduce crime in our county. And this is one way of showing the citizens that we're being serious about abating crime from these early jail releases.
His name is Jeff Stone, supervisor in Riverside County, candidate for California State Senate. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Paul Zellerbach, the DA of Riverside County. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition. You know what Welcome back to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest now, Paul Zellerbach, DA for Riverside County. Sir, we just spoke with Jeff Stone, a supervisor in your county, and he is a bit apoplectic about AB 109. His big issue, though, is he feels as if it's time for the state to start constructing prisons. We haven't constructed prisons for 10, 20 years. As a law enforcement official yourself, do you have a sense of that? I mean, I know you're a prosecutor, but do you have a sense of where we are on that front?
Well, I know that the legislature up in Sacramento, given its political sway, is not inclined to build new prisons at this point in time, but I think it's going to come to a point where we have to. We have no choice.
And here in Riverside County, as I mentioned with Mr. Stone, there are efforts to build more jails.
Correct. We're really behind in comparable counties with respect to the number of jail beds we have in Riverside County, but the Board of Supervisors has been very good about trying to catch up. We're building a new facility in Indio, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll start constructing a new facility in Banning as well.
At the same time, I'm sure you know that Governor Brown has been able to persuade the federal court, which had mandated that the state prisons contract by about 10,000, to give them more time to try to come up with a resolution before that order goes into place. He now is until the end of February.
Correct.
What's your sense of that? Does it help the counties that there's more time, or does it not really impact the counties?
Well, I don't think it really impacts the counties, because I don't believe, and the governor has said, that he's not going to release these 8,500 inmates. They're just going to house them out of state in other facilities.
Which is expensive.
Which is expensive, but I think there needs to be a short-term and a long-term solution derived by the legislature.
Could that include sentencing reform? And that's, presumably your bailiwick, given you're a
well,
prosecutor.
Given I'm a prosecutor and a former judge.
Exactly.
They've talked a lot about sentencing reform. I'd like to see what they're specifically talking about before I took a position on that.
Speaking of sentencing reform, you've adopted, one could argue, a version of sentencing reform with the Veterans Courts.
Correct.
And I want to get a sense of the history of them before we talk about Riverside's recent adoption of them.
Well, in 2006, the California State Legislature realized that California has the biggest veteran population of anywhere else in the nation. About 2.5 million people, veterans, live in California. So they passed legislation that created a Veterans Court program and allowing the 58 counties to opt in. Riverside County was the 9th county in the state of California to create a Veterans Court. That was one of the first things I did when I became DA in January of 2011. Having been a former judge, I went to the court and said, we need a Veterans Court in Riverside County.
And one of the reasons why I understand you were a fan of the Veterans Court is you had worked in a mental health court as a judicial officer.
I'd been a mental health court judge for several months, and a lot of the mental health individuals who came into my courtroom were veterans. And they have specific issues that need to be addressed that mental health court really couldn't address. And I thought a Veterans Court could. We have over 100,000 veterans just in Riverside County.
So in order for a veteran to be able to access this unique specialized court, what are the qualifications? It seems odd to say it that way, but what are the qualifications?
Well, there are qualifications.
Right, but it's criminal qualifications, but be that as it may.
First of all, the criminal issue or problem has to be nonviolent or non-serious. Oftentimes what we see is drug-related or alcohol-related offenses that occur. And the law requires that this disability be somehow related to their military service, whether it be Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever.
So presumably, let's say they began to have a drinking problem and they got a DUI, or they had some anger management issues and there may have been some yelling and screaming, or would that even qualify if there was pushing and shoving?
Not domestic violence, that wouldn't qualify, but right now our Veterans Court program in Riverside County is at capacity. We have over 60 veterans and there's a waiting list to participate in the program. It's an 18-month program.
So explain it. So the crime qualifies.
Correct.
It can be demonstrated that it's as a result of PTSD or whatever it is.
Correct.
Then what happens?
Well, then they enter the program and we have a collaboration of services.
Please describe. That's the most important thing.
And that's where the Veterans Court is unique, because we have the VA hospital, we have Riverside County Mental Health, the probation department, the DA's office, and the public defender's office, all working together in Veterans Court. And that's a collaborative effort you rarely see in any court.
Right. And so what exactly happens? They will go to the Veterans Court judge?
Correct.
So in Riverside County right now, there are judges assigned, there'll be a traffic judge or a child custody. So there's a Veterans Court judge.
There is a Veterans Court judge. We only have one, and he's in Riverside.
What's his name? Do we know him?
Judge Mark Johnson.
So you must know him?
I do. He's a friend of
Right.
mine. And what's interesting is he is a colonel in the Air Force Reserves.
Perfect.
And he's been in the military for over 20 years.
He gets
so
it.
he gets it. He
Right.
appreciates and understands the issues.
And so a case will be presented before him.
Correct.
Is there discretion? I mean, what does he do? I mean, I really want to get a flavor for it.
Well, the DA's office determines eligibility.
I understand.
For the veteran. And once they're in the program, then we assist them in getting VA benefits, which are very problematic and difficult on occasion.
We know there's a backlog.
Exactly. So this expedites that whole process for the veteran. Sometimes we put them in a housing situation if they're homeless. So we provide all kinds of resources for them, counseling, mentoring.
And what must happen by the end of the 18 months? Must they complete a drug rehab program if that's their issue, or a mental health program?
Or both.
Okay.
Oftentimes you see both issues.
Sure.
It's an 18-month intensive program, and if they successfully complete it, and we had our first graduation of our first half dozen veterans a few months ago. And the Veterans Court program, Riverside County, has already won 2 statewide awards.
Wow.
Several months ago, we got a $350,000 federal grant because our Veterans Court is so outstanding in Riverside County.
And I recently read an article in the Press Enterprise, and they talked about a vet, Ryan Frederick. I don't know if you read that article, but
did.
It actually brought tears to my eyes because it's undeniable that he suffered dramatically more when he came home than when he was serving. When he was serving, it was just kind of, he was serving. He comes home from, I think it was Afghanistan, and he just fell apart.
Well, you don't have the stress of the military back when you come home.
Right.
And everything hits you, and now what do? You don't have anyone giving you orders or telling you what to do, and they're at a loss.
Right, and so he's from Scottsdale, but ultimately I think it was a DUI that brought him within the program, but he just feels completely blessed by the fact that he was able to participate.
Well, one of those veterans from the first Veterans Court program.
Is this Gilbert? Yeah.
Gilbert.
I'm not sure how to say his last name. Now please tell us a story, because it's also touching.
He texted me.
Oh God, how'd you get your
or
text?
sent me an email
Okay.
when I was campaigning for the office of district attorney, when he was in the Middle East. Or in Afghanistan or Iraq, I can't remember. He texted me and said, we need a Veterans Court in Riverside County. And then just by happenstance, he was one of the first class members.
Literally. I mean, he had gotten into a minor altercation, I guess, with a relative. It was appropriate to put him in to that program.
Correct.
But what is so nice about it is here you have someone who sensed the need. He was able to get in touch with you.
And took advantage of it personally.
Took advantage of it personally. How are they doing? Do you know them?
Well, Gilbert goes with me out in the community and speaks when I address veterans groups. And he graduated from the program. He's a success.
Right.
And I look to the veterans and go, here's what can happen.
Right. Is there a way for a veteran or someone else who may want to give back to get involved?
No question. We need more mentors, veteran mentors, for the people that are going through the program. Now, Gilbert is being a mentor as
Nice.
well. He's now a nurse who's employed and has a
Perfect.
job.
Oh,
He's doing
great.
very well.
Great.
But we need more mentors, and there's more veterans out there.
So how can we, is it rivcoda.org?
RIVCODA.org.
will get you there.
Absolutely.
And I have to think, I mean, look, there are other, if you're watching throughout the state, LA County has it, Orange County, San Bernardino, San Diego, San Mateo, Santa Barbara, Santa Clara, Tulare, Ventura Court. I mean, this is now really spreading, and it's absolutely in the largest counties. So I'm sure regardless of whether you live in Riverside County or not, there is a way for you to get involved.
Anywhere in Southern California.
Right, and the mentorship, I think that's got to be one of the keys to help these young men and women move on, especially if that mentor may have had their own challenges.
Exactly, and that mentorship goes beyond this program. It can last for years.
I want to thank you so much for what you're doing for the veterans of Riverside County, and the best news is that the program is spreading throughout California. His name is Paul Zellerbach. He is the DA for Riverside County. My name is Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition. Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Mike Gardner, he is the chair of the California Seismic Safety Commission, also a member of the Riverside City Council. I want to start and speak about issues relating to earthquake safety. I've read a lot of articles recently, especially related to the Los Angeles area. It talks about the vulnerability of many buildings in Los Angeles, and there's a tremendous fear that some of these older buildings, especially the concrete ones, are vulnerable should there be an earthquake, and it needn't even be a huge one.
That's true. It's the issue really, and it's not limited to the LA area. That's what the press is focusing on at the moment, but it's statewide. It's particularly buildings they call soft story, where the construction is more open on the lower level, typically for parking, but not always. And in some of the older buildings, they didn't have enough rebar in the concrete support columns. And if you have significant lateral movement in an earthquake, the columns can begin to crumble and the building will collapse. We saw that with wood frame soft story buildings in the Northridge earthquake.
Right, and we also saw it more recently, I understand, in Christchurch in New Zealand, in Kobe, Japan. And so we know what happens with these older concrete buildings. The challenge is, how do we get them retrofitted, and who pays for that retrofit? Because there have been discussions for decades. I mean, after the Northridge earthquake, the LA City Council was talking about retrofitting. Not a lot got done. It's expensive, and owners don't want to have to bear the cost. Where do we go from here?
It really is a difficult challenge, and it's very similar to what was experienced with unreinforced masonry buildings. Which we've known since the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, don't stand up well to shaking. What we ended up doing as a state with the unreinforced masonry buildings was to mandate that they be inventoried in earthquake hazard areas and then posted. And retrofit was left up to the local jurisdictions, whether they wanted to require it or not. San Francisco, as an example, recently has adopted an ordinance, and they created a taxing district to pay for upgrading some of the soft story buildings.
It's interesting you mentioned creating an inventory, because as I understand it, at least in the Los Angeles area, there are some universities that have created an inventory. For whatever reason, that inventory has not gone public, and it seems very nefarious. I don't mean to suggest it's criminal, but like, what's the big secret? I mean, these are our lives.
As I understand, the concern is from your former livelihood, lawyers.
Yes, my former livelihood, yes.
They are worried about the possibility of liability if they release the study. It makes my building less valuable. I can't rent it. I can't sell it.
Well, you're going to see real liability if it comes crashing down during an earthquake.
Arguably, that's an act of God, and as the owner, I'm not responsible.
So what's going to happen?
I think the list will be released. I think we'll get past that issue fairly soon, and the list will be released. This is something that the Seismic Safety Commission will be talking about in a not too distant future. From a state policy perspective. What should we do? How do we create an inventory? How do we get around questions like the liability?
A taxing district. That's a very interesting concept. It's almost like a business improvement district, where folks choose to tax themselves as a way to improve the community, the business area. What about doing it as a way to improve your earthquake safety?
I think that can be done. San Francisco did. Others may follow suit.
Okay, I want to shift gears, if I may, and talk about a story that made national news. And it made national news from the great city of Riverside, and that deals with the question of pit bulls. I have to tell you, our closest friends have a pit bull, and this is the most loving animal I've ever encountered. And those who love pit bulls love them to no end. Those who fear pit bulls, literally, it's as if it's the fear of God if they see a pit bull. I mean, pit bulls engender very serious emotions. How is it that Riverside became front page news as it related to the question of pit bulls?
Our city adopted an ordinance that requires sterilization of pit bulls.
But let's back up, if I may, because it's okay to give away the punchline. It's important. But what brought this on? You know, some would say, was it a solution seeking a problem? I mean, was there a problem?
There are two things I think that drove the issue. One is there has been an increase in coverage of pit bull attacks, and we've had some very serious ones in and around the city of Riverside.
Okay.
I've had 2 constituents who were badly bitten in the last 6 months.
Okay.
But maybe more importantly, if you look at the animals that are in the shelter, 20% of the dogs that are in the shelter are pit bulls and pit bull mixes, and 30% of the animals that are euthanized, nice way of saying we kill them,
Right.
are pit bulls.
And that's
They are-
disproportionate to their population.
Yes, and they are a hard animal to adopt out, and we overbreed them. And there really is no reason for a pit bull, or any dog for that matter, but particularly a pit bull because we do put down so many,
Right.
to be intact unless you are a regular breeder or there's some special reason.
Right. So, as you said, Riverside passed an ordinance. I believe it's similar to one that was passed in Riverside County for
Yes.
the unincorporated areas, and it mandates that pit bulls be sterilized. There are exceptions, as you said, for registered breeders, dogs too sick to be sterilized, law enforcement animals. Interestingly, it caused a lot of debate and discussion. In the final analysis, why did Riverside, the city, take that bold step?
I think, again, the combination of protecting the public and the public's pets, because while pit bulls, I don't think they're as bad as their reputation portrays them to be, but if a pit bull bites, they are so powerful.
But here's
they
the
can
issue.
do so much
I mean,
damage.
you know the expression "guns don't kill people, people kill people." You've heard that. You know, one could easily argue pit bulls don't hurt people. It's the owners that hurt the people because they don't train their pit bulls. And so the question becomes, does spaying or neutering, will that make it better if you still have an owner who doesn't know how to train the pit bull?
Spaying and neutering, especially if you do it at a younger age, reduces roaming. It makes dogs, male and female, less likely to escape their yard. So you will see fewer animals on the street roaming around, which means fewer will get picked up, and there'll be fewer encounters between pit bulls and other dogs.
Right. I
on
mean, I
leash.
definitely understand the issue of the shelters, and I get it. But again, it begs the question about the sterilization issue. In the final analysis, if these owners are just lazy, sloppy, is it going to matter?
I think it will make some difference because it does reduce aggression, particularly in the male dogs.
So it will. So the studies do suggest that dogs that are not intact, as we call it, pit bulls specifically, they do have less aggression. They're not as likely to lash out.
Yeah, it's not a guarantee, of course.
Of course, no, absolutely not. What about the cost, though? I mean, at a certain level, you have a pit bull now. I mean, is there a grandfather clause? Because, I mean, it does cost money to spay and neuter.
It does, and there are low-cost spay-neuter programs, both through Department of Animal Services and several of the local animal rescue groups. The Mary S. Roberts Pet Adoption Center has a low-cost spay-neuter, and we are looking for ways to fund even that cost for those who genuinely need it.
Were you surprised by the amount of coverage this story received? Because it really, I mean, I read about it on a national website.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that there was more national coverage than there was local discussion. We had 7 speakers.
That's it.
No, I'm sorry, 8 speakers.
8, fine.
Who came to
pro
address
or
the
con?
council on this. It was a mix. There were 5 against.
The fact
and
you
3
remember
for.
is stunning, but be that as it may.
Yeah, there were 5 against and 3 in support.
Right. And so in the final analysis, you feel as if this was the appropriate measure. It goes into effect in a few months, which is fine. Are you moving towards creating solutions for those that may have financial challenges?
We are. There is some help already in place, and we want to provide additional.
Okay, his name is Mike Gardner. He is a member of the Riverside City Council. He's also chair of California's Seismic Safety Commission. My name is Brad Pomerance. I want to thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.